everyone, welcome to this week's release of the Hashrate Happy Hour Podcast. On today's show, I'm coming to you live from Miami for Mining Disrupt, where I'm joined by Cam McDonald, the Operations and Development Manager at Foundry Digital. We had an absolute blast talking through things such as how companies are justifying their returns on a commercial solar project from an EPC perspective, to how Cam thinks through a Bitcoin mining facility co-located at a solar project, and what some of the hesitancies are from a utilities perspective to adopting Bitcoin mining in a bigger way. You're really going to want to stick around for the whole episode to hear all of the incredible knowledge that Cam shares on this episode. Today's podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, the Texas Blockchain Council, a Bitcoin-first nonprofit industry organization working to make Texas the jurisdiction of choice for Bitcoin mining and blockchain innovation. They will be hosting North America's premier policy conference for Bitcoin and the digital asset ecosystem on November 15th through the 17th in Fort Worth, Texas. For more information, please visit their website at texasblockchaincouncil.org. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Like I said in the introduction, I'm here live in Miami for Mining Disrupt with Cam McDonald at Foundry. Cam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm pumped. How's the conference been for you guys?
It's been a good conference. I think Mining Disrupt does a good job of having the right people in the room for what we do, specific to proof of work and mining space. It's definitely a little bit of bear market vibes, but people are getting deals done, and it's good to see people still building at this time.
Yeah, it's fun, versus like Bitcoin Miami, or what is it called? Bitcoin 2023? Bitcoin Miami? What do they actually call the one that was back?
I think it's Bitcoin 2023 in Miami. Everybody calls it Bitcoin Miami. Next year we get to call it Bitcoin Nashville.
Right? Did we just call it Bitcoin Nashville then? Yeah. So anyways, yeah. This one's fun because like that one I was like, all right, are you a crypto bro? Or like, are you into Bitcoin? Are you into Bitcoin mining?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's fun to have like a very concentrated group here. You know what you're getting into. You know who you're talking to. It's fun. Well, I'm good. I'm glad that it's been good for you. And you guys are putting on a big dinner tonight too, aren't you?
Yep. Doing a client appreciation dinner, and it's just a good time. Our events lady Jody really does a good job.
Shout out to Jody.
None of this happens without Jody. So,
including this right now, us being able to sit down. We've got this really nice, quiet, tucked away little room away from the madness at the show. It's great. All right. Well, Cam, I want to kind of start out with like, what's your background? Where are you coming from? I like to start there because that helps me and the audience just understand what your expertise, what you have spent years doing. So give us a walk through your background and how did that lead you to Bitcoin mining?
Yeah. So coming out of college, I went to Pitt for entrepreneurship and business management with a minor in finance, and it was right in the middle of the shale fracking boom in Appalachia. So energy was everywhere. Mm-hmm. Fracking, oil, gas was everywhere. I had friends dropping out of college to go work wellheads, and it made me curious about energy. So leaving college, I wanted to get into the energy space. Didn't quite know what that meant. I'm from Buffalo. Grew up, born and raised, said I was never going back. Best job offer I had was for a energy company in Buffalo that was an early mover in demand response. And they were also a commercial industrial energy brokerage. So selling contracts to manufacturers, hotel groups, things like that, all over PJM grid, all over New York. And that's really cut my teeth in energy. And working there, NRG actually bought us out. So got into, doing the same thing, but working for NRG.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Were you on like the biz dev side of things? Like what was the role like within? Yeah.
That? So I cut my teeth, 150 phone calls a day, inside sales, bring in a lead, pass it on to the closing team, the more educated guys on the market. We had a good, really dedicated analyst team that would go through every account, make sure the strategy in which how we were bidding that energy was correct and market competitive versus how other people may look at it. And then as I cut my teeth in that, started closing my own accounts, and then moved into a closing role where I'd work directly with the analysts to strategize and close the accounts that were brought in by me and some of the other reps.
Damn. 100 calls a day.
Oh, it was 100 plus calls a day. It was call center.
Holy
you
shit.
learn rejection quick.
Yeah, no shit. I mean, I cut my teeth at inside sales. That was like the first role that I ever had as well, was inside sales. Dial.
Yep. Smile and dial.
Smile and dial. That's a good one.
And when you're in it, it's embrace the suck. But looking back, it's such an experience that a lot of people don't have. I'm willing to pick up the phone and talk to anybody. It opens doors. Some people don't want to do that. Some people can't do that.
100%. Yeah. It's, I know a lot of people that are afraid to just have the conversations. Even when they're excited to go have the conversation, they still need a little push out the door.
I think we all do at times, but yeah, that really grounded out of me. After that, I went and worked for a local family company, not my family, but a local family company that was doing real estate development, construction management at the commercial level. And they had a small commercial solar company doing commercial industrial solar in New York through the New York Sun program. So, a couple hundred kW type arrays at manufacturing plants and stuff around New York State. And then in that time is when New York launched the community solar program, and they were actually very successful with that program. They're probably, I think, the state with the most community solar turned on over the last decade. So I was in the middle of that when the tariffs were changing, the rate cases were changing, the incentive programs all changed, and had a page, like a booklet of 400 pages of utility tariff and regulation information that I had to become an expert on, and kept it next to my bed every night, and learned the new solar in New York. From there, I'd left there for a regional EPC player out of northern New Jersey, doing solar development, same commercial industrial stuff, but all over the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, and then also doing business development on the EPC side. So engineer, procure, construct, basically design, build contracts where these bigger development shops would land a client, sign a PPA. They needed a company to actually come in and design and build it, interconnect, interface with the utility, and handle that work. So basically selling to other solar companies construction services while also developing our own projects.
Very cool.
Doing that through COVID. Coming into 2019, I'd always been crypto curious. I had some dances with crypto in 2017. You start seeing the articles. I had known about Bitcoin back in my college days. I attribute that to like my formative years being Occupy Wall Street happening, and family directly impacted by the 2008 financial crisis. So I think there's always been a little bit of a against the system there.
We all kind of start from like an anarchist perspective.
I think we all do. And I ended up getting pretty passionate about it in late 2019. Spent the better part of 2020 as a crypto bro, as someone put it. I was in all sorts of degenerate projects, learning DeFi, playing in Ethereum, some other L1s. Always paid attention to Bitcoin, but I was further out on the risk curve.
Sure. You're going after the high octane.
Yeah. And it was the COVID time. You're working from home. You're not going out seeing friends and family. I wanted to put my brain to use and learn something new. And then I really wanted to see where you could take a decade career and energy and get into crypto. And that's when I really got back into Bitcoin and really got re-orange pilled. And it's like, that's, if you have energy experience, that's the natural fit for entering the crypto space in a working type of relationship.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And then, I mean, you ended up with Foundry, and I mean, you guys,
I'd call it lucky on my part.
Yeah. You think so?
Yeah. Foundry is a great shop,
it's
great
amazing.
company.
Yeah.
They're doing great things in the space, and they were an early mover in North American mining. Really doing their part institutionalizing the space.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, and we'll get into it. You guys have a lot of, I don't know if you want to call them verticals or branches, or, I mean, just all encompassing. You guys do a lot of really cool work. Awesome. Well, I appreciate the walk through your background. So I want to kind of stay on the solar
project type thing, you know, understanding that you were on the EPC side, I'm curious, were you having conversations with the people that were coming to you for the EPC work on a solar build? Were they talking about how they were monetizing that type of a project without Bitcoin attached to that? Because I look at it, I mean, is it just a credits play? Is it, or what's going on there?
So back then it was the investment tax credit. Started at 30%, slowly sunset over a period of time, got extended.
Wow.
That program brought in a lot of institutional capital. So anybody from banks to very large manufacturing companies worldwide, if they had tax appetite in the US, solar was a means to have an investment that could have a cash flowing ROI and lower their tax exposure.
Sure.
And anybody in the energy space probably knows this, but you know, we had similar but different incentives for coal-based production throughout the early 1900s, similar incentives to get rural grids built and power production to rural America. We had incentives for nuclear when we had to get the nuclear program started, and you know, the big push in the 70s to get all these nuke plants that are now 50 years old built. And you know, the next wave of that was what they used to call alternatives, now renewables, you know, wind and solar. Some places include hydro in that. I think hydro is more institutional power gen than renewable in most cases. And so these companies would get in, they'd have a dev shop or they'd team up with a company that was a dev shop and take down projects and go find a credit worthy PPA offtaker, long-term contracts. You're talking 25, 30, 40-year contracts for power purchase agreements, built-in CPI adjustments into these contracts, and just long-term power offtake for these renewable projects, whether it's a school district or a large corporation, the Googles, the Metas, the Amazons of the world. And then the ESG movement really started taking off like 2018 timeframe. So that buy pressure on the renewable side, tied with tax credits and these rapid growth in some of these big companies, kind of created a perfect storm, in my opinion, for investment flowing in. That kind of stagnated with the supply chain crunch and COVID, changing laws, and then the IRA Act came out recently, and that's opened up the floodgate for further investment in the space. So you have a lot of renewable penetrating markets where either the sun shines good, the wind's blowing, and you can monetize it. Our grid wasn't designed to handle that feed in those areas. We've always been designed to produce centrally, push it to the places where it's consumed. So that, like, there's technical issues with it. And when you get in, and I'm not an expert in this, but when you get into the renewable side, the biggest hurdles for these big utility scale solar wind projects now is sunsetting PPAs, where they no longer have an off-taker or an off-taker defaulted, or they had a percentage of it that they would go what they call merchant risk, where they're just going to sell and play the wholesale market with a percentage of the generation. And when you have so much penetration of generation in an area, you get dislocated basis from where it's being produced to where it's going. And that's the transportation cost of that energy. So you get congestion.
I was going to say that's what leads to congestion.
Yeah. And it becomes a material effect on their bottom line. So that's like the biggest hurdle that.
Interesting. Well, and what I find interesting, or one of the most interesting pieces in there, was that you're saying you look back on the history of electrical generation and you're finding that government subsidy from, you know, everything from coal to natural gas to nuclear. So that's actually something I was not aware of. Now that I'm saying it out loud, that's kind of naive of me. Of course, I'm sure the government incentivized to.
No one thinks of it, right? Like, you're not thinking of what happened in the 1920s on the power grid. You know, that's when cities were getting electrified, you know, just prior and around World War I, and then coming out of World War I with the economic boom through the 20s. And they needed power to grow the country the way they wanted to. So naturally, they had to incentivize power generation, fuel sources, coal mining, put people to work.
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now called The Power Brokers. And of course, I'm drawing a blank.
I'm writing that down because I'm looking for more books.
Yep, it's phenomenal. It kind of starts out with like post the Edison Westinghouse battles of like patents over light bulbs and is AC better than DC. So it kind of jumps you right into like, okay, here is now how they started to build out like the transmission, and then from there, God, I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name in the book. It's Samuel. He's like the sole person responsible for the way that the grid is kind of the way it is as far as like state regulated, basically, controlled, monitored, monopoly type actors. So fascinating book. Highly recommended.
I've gone back and I've read, gone deep on Wikipedia and doing some research just to better understand the American grid. I don't know the Samuel guy, so I'm going to have to read this book, but there's a lot of parallels I draw where energy was not regulated at all. And then it became rapidly regulated, and then it slowly deregulated in certain ways through the 60s, 70s, but it's not what we would call deregulation today.
Yeah.
And then it rapidly regulated again due to market issues and underserving certain, different communities or areas. And so you now have this weird mix of regulation and quasi-regulation, self-regulation on top of market deregulation strictly on the supply of power, where the distribution of power is still regulated. So for those listening, you can buy power from people, but the people delivering the power to your home or your place of business are still regulated utilities, but you have a choice on where that power comes from. So that's ERCOT, that's parts of MISO, that's PJM, that's NISO, that's the New England grid. There's lottery system, I think, in Michigan and California, part of Mid-C in the Northwest. So it gets complicated quick.
Oh my God. Yeah. And I'm still very much so a student of like, what the hell is the grid system in the US? Cause they're all different and they all act different, and it's so wild. I don't even understand.
You go to the Midwest and it's got an overarching grid with a bunch of state-owned utilities or municipal utilities or large public
munis.
And you might have your neighbor might be the superintendent of the municipal electric that's servicing all the schools, businesses, places of industry in your region. Or you could live in New Jersey where there's thousands of employees for PSE&G serving, massive load centers, and it's just all different.
Yeah, it's wild. We have, the town is called Glencoe, Minnesota. They have the Bid 49 facility on their grid system. It's this little rural town. He was actually my very first guest, Dave Meyer. He's the general manager at Glencoe Light and Power. They are a municipal power company. And yeah, I've been fascinated by their approach to Bitcoin mining because he embraced it in a pretty big way, and they doubled their revenue. I mean, it was super impactful from like a top line perspective. I don't know how much the bottom line is for them, but there's a lot of tax there that they can get from that. So it's been fun to watch. And yeah, I'm in Minnesota. Minnesota's got a bunch of goofy co-ops and munis and XL Energies in the mix, and who gets to play where, and it's a mess. Yeah,
and I think we're going to start seeing co-ops kind of awaken to this opportunity for, call it, readily active flexible load, Bitcoin mining, maybe some AIML stuff. But, I think Bitcoin mining is one of the only truly available flexible loads at this current time. Energy storage is still not truly economically feasible. You need certain market conditions. You need certain market programs for it to work. But I think like rural America, power co-ops, the municipal power companies, Bitcoin mining is a way to modernize their grid without the heavy capex of repowering grid or building out crazy substation upgrades on their own. And it's a tool to make their grids more efficiently run. You have a handful of people and maybe a small desk that runs the grid and has to manage the demand curve. having access to a Bitcoin mine that's sized appropriately in their territory is a huge tool for them to use without much of a lift on their end.
Yeah.
And I think it'll come around.
I think so too. I think the piece in that's important, and you're very aware of it, which is why you said it, is like has to be right sized.
Mm-hmm.
It I think the future and like the near term future, and then how it's going to continue to progress with Bitcoin mining is like the operators are going to understand that they need to come in more of like a partnership with either the local co-op, the local municipal, or just the utility company that they're working with.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna kind of pivot here.
Let's do it.
So going back to the solar, have you heard of the REAP program?
I'm not.
No. Okay. No. So I had a friend of mine. He called me and told me about it, and it's like a grant program for solar project build out, like small business, commercial sized, and I believe they will grant up to $1 million.
Is this federal or state?
It's federal.
Federal. Okay.
I believe. I'm still, please, anyone out there listening, correct me if I'm misspeaking on it, but yeah, I don't know. It just seemed like a pretty powerful tool to build out. Because so it's a grant up to $1 million or 50% of the project. It's a grant up to 50% of the project up to $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
So you could do a $2 million build out. You get a grant for 50% of that, and then you get all the credits and the tax incentives and all the other goodies that come along with the solar. It's just curious if you'd heard of it. But
I've not heard of it, but it sounds very similar to the old New York program that was New York State specific called New York Sun, where it was a grant program based on the size of the solar array. You get X amount of dollars towards the build at the time of construction.
And how attractive is a build out like that, in knowing you could slap a Bitcoin mining facility that's right sized? Because I'm guessing a $2 million solar project, you're probably looking at like maybe 2 megs on that type of a project.
Let me pull the calculator up.
We're crunching numbers here. I've got his wheels spinning. We'll see. Yeah, I'm just curious what the thought would be around a right-sized mining project on something like that.
So like that would be around 1 megawatt of solar.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Using rough numbers,
Mm-hmm.
about 1 mega solar.
And maybe put in like a 250 kilowatt mining facility on that to take up a quarter of it.
Yeah, and then from there it gets complicated, right? Because the sun's going to shine 30% of the time, give or take, depending on where you are. Closer to the equator, it's going to be a little bit more weather dependent as well. But the sun's going to shine 30% of the time. Now, that 30% of the time is typically going to be during the peak hours, typically, of when the grid is experiencing its peak load during the day. So if you have an industrial rate class that's time of use, that could make a lot of sense because you could capture cheaper baseload power from the grid in the evening for your mine and then mine off of the solar during the day. But the solar production curve is kind of like a parabola. So it goes up throughout the day and then comes back down.
And that peak usually hits right around the smack middle of the day, right? Like when you're thinking about that parabola,
like in between 2 and 5 p.m.
Oh, okay.
Depending on where you are, closer to the equator, closer to noon, roughly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you say then, so then that it's a decently compelling prospect to say, okay, you could go build out a 2 million, 1 megawatt solar facility and right size a mining operation to that.
The question becomes,
would you then be selling that power back into?
That's the exact question. So it's going to depend on where you are and what your state or your local utility allows you to do. Some have net metering where it's like rollover cell phone minutes. Produce the power, all your kilowatt hours that you produce, push to the grid, get just credited back to you in a kilowatt hour bank. You roll your meter back when you're using it and you're not producing your own power. Roll it forward when you're producing, or back when you're producing and not using. Roll it forward when you're using and not producing. And it's like a rollover cell phone minute. States are starting to move away from from those sort of
Seems
programs.
like that wouldn't really. I mean, how beneficial is that? Because
it's an easy system.
Okay.
It's an accounting.
Yeah, I mean,
energy is accounting.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so that's almost not even like because I see it. The point is like, okay, you're gonna generate that power, and
you're only using a quarter of it when you're producing a meg, the full meg, but it's accounting for the dollars that you're putting in the electrons back into the grid at that time, and then coming off your bill on the other side. But not all areas have programs like that, or areas have more advanced programs like that where it's more time of use based, where the value of that energy at the time you're generating it becomes the value, a dollar value credit on your bill. So these are definitely like the commercial industrial type solar programs that come around in different states, and that they're always changing.
Yeah.
So the other question is like, do you add the CapEx to a project to put some batteries and stretch that peak load out further, and to mine off of that further? And
well, I mean, you kind of had the right idea that I was thinking was like you get on a time of day use rate where you can hit the shoulders instead of the peak, and then like your uptime on grid power is like 70%, 60%. So you're going to have just a ludicrously low power rate and power bill on the grid, and then you're going to generate your own. But I kind of like the idea more of like a solar project like that being more useful for like a town or like the actual grid versus, because you could go do this. You could go build this system, $2 million, 1 meg, and only run a Bitcoin mining facility off it.
Yep.
But that just doesn't seem like it's really.
There's no net
like
value
not
gain.
a net benefit to the local town, really. I mean, maybe there's an employee or two working, but yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
I agree.
Yeah.
The net value to the community at large or the grid at large is probably negligible at that point. And you're just doing an exercise of, is this CapEx over X amount of years cheaper than what I'd be buying that power from the grid on? And that's what it becomes at the end of the day.
Which I think it would.
Over time, depending on time scales, right? Like solar's what they call a long life asset, 25 plus years. Most investment banks are underwriting projects 35 plus years now.
Oh, they are. Okay. Interesting. So I hear stuff like this, and I you have some of these conversations about, mining, because mining does actually serve. Well, I guess let me ask you, what do you see the benefit being of Bitcoin mining at like solar projects? I mean, is there?
Let's take a step back and say what is the value that Bitcoin mining brings to maybe a grid that has a high renewable penetration, be it wind or solar?
Yeah, that's a much better question. Yeah. Thank you.
So you don't have to be co-located for the benefits to be felt on the grid.
Okay.
But you need to be in that same region. So wind and solar are being produced in X region, and then you have a right-sized project. The volatility created by intermittent resources, wind's blowing, this wind farm's pushing out 100% of its capacity, wind stops.
Yep.
Now you have fluctuations in the grid. So there's a thing called frequency regulation. The grid was built to run at 60 hertz. The generators that we use today and have been using for the better part of a century typically push out on the grid at 60 hertz. To your combined cycle, your reciprocal cycle, natural gas, your thermal load, nuclear coal, hydro generators, they're all pushing at 60 hertz. The intermittent wind and solar, when it comes up and comes down, it can change that frequency on the grid. And when a frequency on a grid, and we'll keep this high level. When the frequency on the grid changes, you can fry the customer's electronics that are using power. So frequency regulation in every region of the country, even the small utilities do this. They have to regulate their frequency somehow. Flywheels, large capacitor banks, just for power regulation. And then there's ancillary service programs, which I'm sure you've heard of.
Yep.
That is, frequency regulation is a big part of those programs. Wind and solar coming up and down in big ways on capacity charts and ERCOT or SPP can mess with the frequency. They can throw the grid out of whack. They can trip a substation off. That said, you also have this volatility in the markets on the congestion that can happen where, let's look at SPP. You have wind blowing and every wind farm is running and there's not that much power being consumed. These projects need to be curtailed. That power is not benefiting anybody. Energy storage could solve that for 4-6 hours, but it's not going to solve it long term. So we're pushing our grid in a way where it wasn't designed to take power this way, but it's also not designed to have an over amount of power. So it's a constant management of having enough power on the grid to serve the demand. And now monetarily, these companies spend all that CapEx building out the generation and they're being curtailed. So their ROIs are getting pushed out. Investors are getting upset. Having a flexible load such as Bitcoin mining can help manage the grid frequency. You can help maintain the supply demand curve at parity. And it gives these generators a buyer of last resort, or even in some cases, maybe a buyer of first resort.
First resort, yeah.
And that's where it's going.
Okay.
But there's hurdles.
Yeah. I love that. And I appreciate you refined the question a lot better too. So that was beautiful. I really appreciate that. So then just like devil's advocate type thing, like what's the hesitancy around doing this? Like adding Bitcoin in, is it still just this nascent thing that people don't really know what it is? They think it's super risky, or like, are there other points of friction, or like
all the above?
Okay.
Yeah. So it's nascent. And with it being nascent, we're talking some of these big miners, 100 meg site, 150 meg site. That's big in our space. It's a drop in the bucket for big energy. They don't wake up for that.
Okay.
They need this in size. So I went to a conference put on by writers, energy transition conference. Wanted to hear kind of what's going on in the renewable market, the hydrogen side of things, the IRA. I'm a little dislocated from the renewable field these days. Still talk to old colleagues and stuff, try and keep up on it best I can. But went to that conference and listening to these people speak, the CEO of a big wind development company, very large generation owner, CEOs and high up guys in these public utility companies. And everything they're saying is, the grid wasn't designed for this much power, or our projects are going to be underwater in certain areas because of overgeneration. And they're dancing around saying, like, we need a flexible load. And I think they realize it. They see hydrogen as a potential future. And
it's getting a lot of buzz.
And that's exactly, it's buzz. There's no demand for it right now. And we're incentivizing creation of a commodity with a lack of demand, which in theory, the demand should follow that because it'll race to zero on the commodity.
Yeah.
And then it becomes economically feasible to switch things over to hydrogen. But we're nowhere near that day. So hydrogen production now is tough. Everybody's trying to figure out how they're going to do it. So the flexible load options, you're looking at Bitcoin mining, hydrogen, flywheels, and energy storage.
And flywheels.
It's an older grid technology where they're basically storing power in a mechanical fashion and releasing it in a mechanical fashion to regenerate energy, typically used to maintain a frequency. It's short burst. It's not gonna hold power for long.
Interesting. That's new for me. Cool.
It's like pump storage is another option, right?
Got it. Yeah.
But Bitcoin mining is feasible now, has its own incentives, naturally built into the code. We're mining Bitcoin, we're producing a revenue. I won't say a profit. Not everybody generates a profit.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. And so it's got some built-in incentives, but it's got a lot of synergies with where additional value could be unlocked.
Okay.
So you're talking where some of these energy generators could start unlocking more value in their projects. And I think the contracting situation needs to change. It's not just like these big renewable companies want at least a 10-year offtake arrangement and a PPA, structured PPA that's bankable with a counterparty that's bankable. And our industry just isn't fully there yet.
Yeah, because I think, like you said, those big 100-megawatt sites, 100-plus megawatt sites, I mean, honestly, most of those that we have right now have only been out and running for 3 years.
Yeah, at most.
Yeah.
Yep. And so our industry doesn't have a long history. It has a storied history in North America. Munis and co-ops in New York were early targets for small Bitcoin miners. Great power rates, good access to old legacy infrastructure. Not talking about these 100 meg type sites, but a couple megs, 5-10 megs. We had good Rust Belt infrastructure.
Yep.
And Bitcoin mining was super cyclical, very nascent at that time. And 2016, 2017, 2018 bear market was years ago in Bitcoin time for us, right? It's yesterday for utilities.
Yeah.
So, those things die hard. They need to learn. They need time to relearn the market. The market's changing. And utility companies are, a lot of them are old. It's in, they have their traditions. They move slow.
Sure. Do you see any, how probabilistic, not probabilistic, but how do you think through potential points of failure? So let's just kind of go dystopia, utopia world where, you've got the big energy generators have now folded this into the portfolio. And what do you see as some of the problem areas? And so just one example would be all the machines break from a snowstorm or something, and now they don't have this load balancing tool, or I don't know. Do you think about any of those things, or are there any other
Personally, not yet.
No, yeah,
but I should spend some time thinking about that.
I'm just curious about that. I don't know. It's like a devil's advocate thing. It's okay, what
we get so reliant on this as a tool to manage the grid that when we need it most, it could fail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I always kind of just kick that kind of thing around. It's what are the points of failure?
Yeah, that's definitely one of them.
Yeah.
But those are that kind of example. We've seen that happen already, not in Bitcoin mining, but in power. Winter Storm Uri, the polar vortexes that came across the Midwest and Northeast in 2013, 2014. It got so cold that the gas lines that are buried 8 feet under the ground and to the Northeast, the gas is moving too slow, so that we couldn't produce gas-based power. So those things happen. It's not far-fetched to think that, some sort of environmental factor or maybe even malicious factor affects a large Bitcoin mine that's being used as a grid management tool.
Yeah, I always kind of gravitate towards that type of stuff just because I think that Bitcoin could go to zero. I think that most people aren't thinking that way anymore.
It would take something incredible to
zero. I don't even think that the old stodgy companies are even thinking that anymore. I think they're past it. I think they're past
Bitcoin can go to zero. I think they're not past Bitcoin can drop 10,000 in a day.
Yeah.
The volatility is something that's tough for people to wrap their head around. And it's a nuanced industry. It's complicated. It's not just energy rates. It's not just Bitcoin mining or Bitcoin price. but it's hash rate too. And
Yeah.
and if you're not in the industry and paying attention to it, you could miss stuff and make wrong decisions that negatively affect your business in the long term. And so another thing that I think affects it, let's say fast forward however long it is, 5, 10, 20 years, when big energy is the mining industry, I think in that time when big mining becomes the mining industry, or sorry, big energy becomes the mining industry, the biggest holdup there is going to be a grab for talent.
Yeah.
We're in a small space. There's only so many of us that get it. There's only so many of us working day in, day out on this, that big energy, big finance comes in a big way. And when it happens, they're going to need people that have been in it and understand it. And I think we need more people who understand this.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's kind of a nice segue into, at the top, you work for Foundry.
Yep.
One of the verticals, one of the spokes in the wheel of what you guys do is education.
Yeah.
Maybe give us the who's who of Foundry. Like, what do you guys do? How do you do it? What are you working on?
The too long didn't read for people who may not be as familiar is Foundry is a large self miner. Got our start with a lot of ASIC purchasing that we thought we could finance. And there was like a good 6-month year period in the end of the last bear market where it wasn't attractive to people and we had to plug machines in. Bull market came around and all of a sudden people were calling us for financing. This is before my time there. I can't take any credit for the incredible things they did in that last cycle, but Foundry did a big, I think Foundry did the industry a huge, wouldn't call it favor, but huge service in institutionalizing it, bringing money into the space and getting ASICs plugged in North America. Going into 2021, they launched the pool. They got SOC audited. They saw the future. They knew public mining companies would happen. They knew energy companies would be coming in the space, and you have to have the controls and compliance in place to support those people. So I think that was very, they had good foresight on that and built out a great product that is now the number one pool in the world. So,
and that happens so quick too. I mean, I know it was one of those, like, they'd been working on it for a long time. What do you call it? Gradually, then suddenly. Like, yeah. I know that was the case, but man, it was
just a combination of perfect storms. They built a great product. They got their SOC auditing done, and that's like no small step.
Nope.
And went live, and a few months later, China banned mining. There's a huge hash rate migration at the exact same time as a huge institutional investment in the space from North American and European companies and countries, not countries, but investors.
Yeah.
And when I joined Foundry, we were like bouncing around 10, 11, 12 in the pool position. And by the end of the year, we hit number one, and just that needle's been pinned there since. So it was like a combination of a lot of people's hard work and the perfect storm and market conditions, and capitalized on that. And the pool's been this kind of central thing for Foundry where we created some really good relationships with all these North American mining companies, and then we're able to sell services into them, whether it was machine procurement, machine financing when we offered that. And moving forward, it also got us into hosting deals for our own proprietary mining fleet. But moving forward, there's a big emphasis on Foundry to continue providing services to the space. The goal has always been to be a service provider. So, we offer logistics. We're moving ASICs around the world for people. We're moving containers. We're moving power equipment. We have the Foundry X brokerage desk, connecting the buy and sell orders in the market. And there's a few other services coming up that'll be announced later this year. I think the market will receive pretty well.
I hope you can give us at least a teaser or a sampling, just a soundbite maybe at the end here.
There's some that I definitely can't, but they'll be out in a bit. And
come on, not like you heard it here first on the Hashrate Happy Hour podcast.
Not for me. Not for me. But the one big effort that we have right now is operating sites. We have a great operation team operating our own sites, and we want to go out in the market. And I truly think there's a great market fit for us to get into sites and help people operate their site for them. Our staff, our tools, our equipment, our software, and optimize and operate these sites for them and take that administration burden off of the desk. Some people are really good at operating their sites, so they'll never not want to. But I think there's a lot of players in this space, be it financial players or energy companies entering the space, that are really going to want a strong partner in that. And so we're out there looking at deals like that. And by nature of that, we can leverage the Foundry Academy that they've done a really great job on.
Yep.
And bring people in to our headquarters in Rochester, train them up at our own R&D site, put them through the academy, teach them the lessons that we had to learn the hard way, and then get them out in the field working on these mines.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, really, truly, Foundry. Basically, for the last 3 years, I've been following, watching, bugging anyone at Foundry who will answer an email from me. So yeah, you guys are fantastic. You do really awesome work kind of all through the spectrum when it comes to Bitcoin mining. It was pretty awesome to see you guys, like you said, pin the needle on being the number one pool. Is like, yes, all right. We've got that.
What's next?
Back in the US. All right, cool. So yeah, it's been fun to watch, and just to kind of keep a tab on the time, because you're slammed with more calls and meetings at this conference. It's almost 5 p.m. here in Florida. One of the last things I kind of like to just kick around and ask is, like, if you were sitting at this table right now with a utility company or an energy producer, and they're like, I don't get it. Like, why would I put Bitcoin mining into the mix or the portfolio, or even as a customer? Because I still have people say, well, I don't want Bitcoin mining on the grid. Like, how would you address that? What would you say?
I would say it's probably the best grid demand management tool that we have in our quiver today. And if people want the renewable penetration that our country seems to be pushing for, you have to have a flexible load, or there's no way you can reach the goals that we've set as a nation or in certain states without a flexible load that is truly agnostic. Bitcoin mining, the network moves on. One mine in Nebraska shuts off, the rest of the network works. A mine in New York has a demand response event due to some storm or high heat in the summer. It doesn't affect the rest of the network. But that mine can actively help that regional grid area. It's a tool in their quiver to manage their grid more effectively. It's a last load of resort. It's a last demand that can be dropped off the grid in a demand management program. A renewable provider might want to use it to hedge financial risk, whether it's wholesale merchant risk in selling their power or a nodal basis risk. There's a lot of ways it can be used as a tool. And I think us in the Bitcoin space, we get so centered on hash rate and efficiency and time to get these things on and ROI that we forget that there's a bigger play out there in the energy side.
Yep.
And I think the way that these two worlds come together, it's just there has to be collaboration. It can't be transactional contracts. It can't be both sides trying to extract value.
Yeah.
They need to work together to unlock additional value.
I love it. And I appreciate that so much. That was very well said. I like hearing that, because I do hope, and I try to ask the utility companies that I have on the show to kind of flip that script and, what would they say to the Bitcoin mining industry? So I appreciate that a lot.
What do they say?
Well, I'm still working on getting more utility companies and generators onto the show. So for any of the audience, if you have connections to utility companies or energy generators, please email me, reach out. Honestly, what they say is, like, take it easy on the timelines. Just chill.
Yeah.
You're not going to get your shit up and running in a month.
Yeah, that's another thing as an industry that
like
we could work on.
Fucking relax. Like,
we need to not look at our feet and look at the horizon.
Yeah.
You know, infrastructure, big energy projects take
a
time.
year. It's going to take 12 plus months.
Yeah, it takes time to do the development, put the legwork in, build the relationships that need built to have successful contracts.
That was the other one. That's the other big one, is like establish that relationship. And I had Tim Eccles, the Georgia Public Service Commission vice chair, on, and the biggest thing that he said was relationships. Get in there early, take them out to dinner, get to know them,
educate them,
right,
and listen to them too, because there's something we can all learn from those guys.
Yeah.
There's so much opportunity out there when these two worlds finally fully collide, and I think we're at like the precipice of the collision.
Yeah. Completely agree.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cam, I want the audience to be able to get in touch with you. How can they get in touch with you, Foundry? Please, give a hand.
All of Foundry's services are on our website with ways to get connected to the various teams. Foundry's on Twitter, at Foundry Services. I'm on Twitter, CampDad Cam. Happy to answer questions, point people to the right people internally to get done what they need done. And Foundry's here to help the industry. That's what we're built around.
Awesome. Cam, this was awesome. Fantastic. Super, super thankful that you were able to step away from the conference today, and
thank you for saving me from the conference.
Give you a little bit of a breather from the chaos down there.
No, I really appreciate you having me here, Ben.
Yeah, this was awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks.